All right, it's Mrs. Zimnick. I'm going to walk you through the foundations of Jacksonian democracy. So Andrew Jackson is known for representing the common man and changing the presidency quite a bit. So we're going to see how he did that. We're going to talk about did he really live up to his promises? I think that's an important thing to think about as well. So I put up here one of his most well-known quotes, "To the victor belong the spoils." And remember, the spoils system is just the process of paying back people that backed him up in his election campaign with good positions, and not necessarily if they're the most qualified. That's another thing. But he really felt it was important to reward loyalty, and that's what his spoils system was all about. So one thing you want to do is be on the lookout here, pages 249 to 254, which is the beginning of chapter 9. What does Jackson say he's going to do? He's kind of a master at using really the press and using his image to get supporters and build up what he stood for. So how is he trying to present himself as the common man? Look for things that make him different or unique from especially a John Quincy Adams. John Quincy Adams was not really happy, especially after witnessing what happened in the inauguration with the crazy party going on in the White House. And just look at how Jackson's going to portray himself differently. So be on the lookout on those pages for that information. We know with the election of 1828, move this up a little, there you go, that it was kind of payback time for Jackson. He really felt he should have become president in 1824. I mean, remember, he won the popular vote. He had the most electoral votes out of anybody, but because that party system had really fallen apart, or was already showing signs of weakness, that's why he's not able to win. There's 4 candidates. Nobody gets that electoral majority, so it goes to the House. And because of that corrupt bargain, I think Jackson was out for it in 1828. He was out for blood. He wanted to avenge that, and he really wanted to portray John Quincy Adams as representing special interests, and he feels like he's the common man. So the West plays a huge role here. Even Eastern workers, some of those new immigrants coming from Ireland, coming from Germany, they're really going to identify with Jackson's roots, being a pretty poor guy himself. Now, by the time he's president, of course, he's made quite a bit of money in land speculation, but he came from very humble backgrounds, especially when you consider the other previous presidents before him. We see in the election of 1828 that all property qualifications for voting had pretty much been lifted, and so that's another thing that Jackson is going to really push for, and he feels that that's going to help him. And the mudslinging, though, was nasty. Remember, we talked about the accusations, the horrible accusations against Rachel Jackson, and all that. What was initially a misunderstanding and a missed paperwork turned into just a really, really nasty campaign. So it was a very nasty campaign. And Rachel's death, Jackson always blamed on what happened here in this election. There's the popular vote. Check that out. This is hard to see too. Can I move that up? Oh, I'm trying to move it up for you here. I'll tell you, this is Jackson. This is Adams. So he wins the popular vote. Again, he had already won in 1828, but this time it's even more of a resounding victory for him. In the electoral vote, here's Jackson right here, and here's Adams. So it's a much bigger margin there. No corrupt bargain this time. Look at the importance that the West has played in this election, and this is what New England's been a little nervous about the whole time. Remember, a lot of New England wasn't crazy about the Louisiana Purchase for this very reason, that they felt like some of their power is going to go here, some of their influence is going to go here, and they were going to lose the power that they had traditionally had. And some of this is also that, remember, by 1828, we're getting our factory system on the ground. It's up and running, and we're not trading with England as much, or Europe. We're relying more on ourselves, and New England is so based in shipping and the merchant industries, and that's just going to be on a decline. So I think we're seeing a shift here in power, definitely in the nation with this election. What does Jackson stand for? Here's what he stands for: the spoils system, rotating people in office. He does not like career politicians. Working relationships with Congress, which is kind of interesting because he will be a pretty veto-happy president. He'll call his cabinet his kitchen cabinet because it's nice and informal, and they were mostly his friends. You go to this little YouTube site, this is all on the website. It's a nice little 7-minute clip that kind of runs down what Jackson does, especially with the bank and the tariff. So let's walk you through that. Jackson wants to kill the bank. Why kill the bank? Like, what's the big problem with the bank? it's a little bit of the Jefferson argument that we saw before, that the bank was going to create wealth without industry. And, just this, it's unregulated. And Jackson said it only helped the rich. So he really makes it a point to take that bank down. And some of this is personal between Clay and Biddle and Jackson. And Jackson can't stand Biddle. He doesn't like the fact that Biddle's using this almost like a central bank for himself. And Henry Clay, of course, we know he wants to be president, so he sees an opportunity here. What Clay does is he teams up with Biddle, kind of backs Jackson into a corner, and even though that bank wasn't going to expire till 1836, he pushes for a recharter. So it would basically make Jackson either veto it, which would look bad and he'd lose some support of some, New England merchants, or just allow the bank to be rechartered, which goes against everything Jackson said he was going to do. So they felt like, oh, this is a win-win. Either way, we win, Jackson loses. Well, Jackson wasn't afraid, and he went ahead and vetoed it. And he just said, he spun it in the press as a victory for him and a victory for the common man. So it really didn't hurt him at all. Clay isn't able to win. After the election of 1832, Jackson decided to just try to kill the bank his own way. And so he pulled all the government deposits out, all the government money out. Even though his Secretary of the Treasury said, this might not be a good idea. You might create some instability in the economic system. He said, I don't care. I want to kill that bank. I'm going to put them in local banks and state banks. But the thing is that these so-called pet banks or wildcat banks, they weren't really the most stable. They weren't easily regulated. And so it's actually going to probably destabilize the economy. There's Nicholas Biddle right there for you. Okay, what's the effect to the bank collapse? I'll move this up right here. There we go. Well, the sale of Western land is going to go up, but so does circulation loans and inflation. So it's kind of a double-edged sword. The states are going to have to borrow for internal improvements, which adds to state debt. And Jackson takes that federal government surplus and gives it to states, which stimulates their spending, but it also kind of triggers some inflation. And one thing we'll see is Jackson was also very much against paper money. He wanted specie circular, gold and silver, especially for that Western land. He just didn't trust that paper money. Felt like it was too easy to inflate the cost and the price, and just too easy to reproduce. He wanted hard coinage of silver. So he will do that. He will do that. And so now this leads us to the Peggy Eaton affair. Okay, you will see my lovely drawing here. Let me see if I can move this up. Didn't realize that my screencast was going to be off. Okay, let's just move this a little bit, and there's Martin Van Buren right down here. Okay, we got John C. Calhoun there. Can you see all the players in our movie? Okay, so basically, this is actually a seemingly kind of insignificant event, but it really does a lot to say why relationships here and here are going to be broken. So Peggy Eaton is the wife of John Eaton. Well, I should say she was married before she was the wife of John Eaton, and probably most likely started her relationship with John Eaton while her first husband was fighting the War of 1812. So that was a little scandalous. So her husband, John Eaton, is appointed to Jackson's cabinet. Well, all the cabinet wives used to get together and, have dinner or lunch or whatever it is they do. And Floride Calhoun, John C. Calhoun's wife, was kind of the ringleader of the Mean Girls. And she used to pick on Peggy Eaton, rip on Peggy Eaton. And Andrew Jackson really identified with Peggy Eaton because of what happened to Rachel. He felt like, I know what it's like to be ganged up on here, and I don't like what's going on here. Of course, John C. Calhoun, there he is with his crazy eyes, sided with his wife. And so eventually this is going to be one of several things, but this is an event that drives the wedge between Andrew Jackson and his former vice president. This is why one of the reasons why Jackson will pick Martin Van Buren to run with him in the second term. All right, election of 1832. Here's Jackson, here's Clay. So pretty resounding victory. And there's the electoral votes. It's even more of a pounding there. I'll get this out of your way. Okay, and here are the states. So Jackson is our red, Clay's going to be our blue. So he really didn't do well. Look at it, even Jackson's taking a little of the Northeast, which is pretty rare for him. Another internal crisis we're going to see here within the United States is Jackson and Indian removal. So Jackson really, to some extent, had almost a paternalistic view towards the Native Americans, but it's going to be the fact that their land is so valuable for cotton. We're talking about what's now Georgia. Let's see, I think I got a map here. Yeah, right here, parts of Tennessee. We got, Georgia, North Carolina, even into Kentucky. and in this land is so profitable for cotton, and we know that cotton is king. Cotton is growing. It's becoming more important as an export. It's becoming more important to our own country. So if you watch this little clip, it'll kind of walk you through the Trail of Tears. I would understand Worcester versus Georgia and what Marshall says there about the right of the Cherokee Nation to exist, because it's Jackson deciding that we can't have a sovereign nation within our own country. We can't have the Cherokees as a sovereign nation within our own country, and that's partially why he forces them to move. The actual Trail of Tears doesn't even happen until 1836-37, so part of it's even while Martin Van Buren's in office. But we're going to look at this in class. We're going to do a simulation where you'll see the different sides: the Seminole Nation, the Cherokee, the Jackson administration, and we'll play that out. Okay, here's the route you can see. All right, shifting a little bit here to the nullification crisis. This is another major internal crisis during the Jackson administration. So remember, Jackson says he's all about states' rights, okay? And after what Jackson does with the Cherokee, he appears to back up the state of Georgia. So I think that's what kind of emboldens South Carolina here. South Carolina feels like Jackson's going to have their back when they decide they don't want to follow this tariff of abominations, this 1828 tariff that was being renewed in 1832. And so they're going to nullify it. They're not going to follow it. All right, and part of the voice behind this is actually John C. Calhoun. He's going to be one of the major voices in his South Carolina exposition and protest, and really shifting to more of a states' rights perspective there. So what ends up happening here is Jackson will push Congress to get a Force Act, and he comes down hard on South Carolina. He does not want to hear it from them. He kind of says, well, I'm all about states' rights unless you're taking on the Union, unless you're taking on the national government and me. And it appears like there may be a showdown here with actual fighting. It's Henry Clay that swoops in, and he's kind of known as being our compromiser here. And he works out a compromise tariff of 1833 that allows both sides to save a little bit of face. But this is not going away, that's for sure. Of course, South Carolina, we know, is going to be the first state to officially walk out of the Union. So I think you're seeing a little foreshadowing. Ultimately, what are the effects of Jackson killing the bank? Well, here's probably something that is related, and that would be the Panic of 1837. Now, Jackson, at this point, he doesn't care, right? He's not president anymore. He's done in 1836. It's Martin Van Buren that has to deal with the mess that he kind of inherits here. And a lot of this, many economists argue it was related to Jackson killing the bank and taking out all the funds. Others say it wasn't related, that it would have happened anyway, that it's a natural ebb and flow of our capitalist system, that we have ups, we have downs. But regardless, we definitely have pretty deep recession in 1837. It was pretty bad. Not quite as bad as what we're seeing right now, but definitely, not a good economic situation. So that'll be something that Jackson will kind of get, in the court of public opinion later on, blamed for. At the time, I think he kind of managed to avoid any criticism for that. So that is some of our major issues happening in the Jackson administration. Just make sure you understand that the whole bank controversy, the whole nullification controversy, what does Jackson say he stands for, and then, how well do you think he lives up to that? That's kind of a good thing to know as well. And that is about it. So